I bet most of you use social media. You might have a Facebook or an Instagram or both and a Twitter. And like most people, you use social media to tell people about your life, right? You post about your life, and some people use it to keep up with friends and family. Some like to post Bible verses and inspirational quotes, and maybe you follow a sports team, or maybe you troll an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Normal stuff, right? But I have like a guilty pleasure, and the only reason I open my Instagram anymore is in hopes somebody's posted a new meme, right? Memes are the best. I've fallen in love with memes. My wife and I over the past year, I follow a bunch of meme accounts, and we're always tagging each other, and we'll be laying in bed, and she'll start laughing out loud. I'm like, what's so funny? That meme you tagged me in yesterday, you know? I share memes with friends, and memes are what it's about. And in case you don't know what a meme is, it's probably easier just to show you one than to tell you what one is. In honor of the new year, and really for me, the best memes are the ones that depict and joke about the struggles we go through, right? We all have struggles, and I picked out a few of my favorite memes about struggles that we all go through. I'm going to show those to you now. If you struggle with traffic, maybe you've seen that one floating around the internet. If you've ever asked God for a sign, there's a good one for that. Go ahead and show the next one there. There it is. And then the best ones are, with animals, making funny faces. So here's a really good one when people annoy you and get on your nerves. Go ahead and play that, yeah. Today I want to talk to you about times in our lives when the struggle is real and the pain that we go through is no joke. Seasons maybe of suffering. We all have pain. We all struggle. If pain was a city, we've all been there. Maybe you've got a second home there. Maybe you live there. You feel like you live in a town called pain. Yesterday, I was at Starbucks early in the morning, and I'd printed out my notes, and I was making some final edits. And as I was sitting there was a gentleman next to me, and he kept peeking over his shoulder, like looking at me, and I could tell he was going to ask me. And he's like, "What are you doing? Are you studying for an exam or something?" I said, "No, I'm actually sharing at church tomorrow." And it's always fun to talk to a stranger about church, right? And he said, "Well, what are you going to talk about?" And I said, "Pain." He's like, "That's a great New Year's message, pain." I was like, yeah, that is true. Maybe I should change my sermon. But really, 30 minutes later, he goes on just telling me about all the pain he's endured in his life. I didn't ask, right? People like that. You're just like, remember I was studying, I was working here, buddy, right? No, he's just telling me he grew up in Israel and the crazy kind of life he had growing up. And now he's here, I think late 40s, and he starts telling me about he's losing his business here in San Diego. He's driving for Uber, but his phone just died, and he's going through a divorce. He's telling me all this pain. He starts telling me he has 2 kids, a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and he starts choking up the pain that's going to cause his kids. He says, "Yeah, I got to stop." And I know that pain. I told him, "Man, I know what divorce is like. I've been through a divorce. In fact, I just, yesterday morning, right before I went to Starbucks, dropped my kids off at the airport." Pain, maybe more than anything, unites us. We all have pain. Maybe your pain is physical. Your struggle is physical. You have a sickness, an illness, a disability, a condition. And because of that pain, you feel like you've been dealt a bad hand in life. Man, if only I didn't have this. People might look at you different. Maybe you've overheard the whispers about you, people mocking you, and you think it's holding you back. And your physical struggle is real. It's not a joke. The pain is deep. Maybe for some this morning, it's an emotional pain, struggle. Maybe you battle anxiety. Always thinking about the future, right? Maybe worrying about your kids. If you're like me, fear of death. It's like the older you get. Like I go to the doctor all the time, like, what is that spot? Why is this hurt, right? Am I dying? Just tell me, doc, right? And anxiety it's not just in the mind. If you've ever battled anxiety, it has like physical effects. I can't breathe. Chest pains, right? And at times you can feel overwhelmed. Maybe it's not anxiety, it's depression. Maybe some trauma you went through, the loss of someone dear to you. Maybe a child that left a scar so deep that you can remember what you were like before that happened and how dramatically your life changed. You've never been the same. And depression can leave you feeling like you can't function. You can't go on. And at times you can feel isolated, alone. The pain is real. Maybe the emotional pain is from regret. Anyone got any regret? Nick, you don't know what I've done. Maybe a crime, an addiction, I don't know. And what that can do is cause us to live with such shame that we can't even open up to people. Because what if they found out how I was? And your emotional pain, man, it's no joke. For some, the struggle, the pain is spiritual. Maybe it's a moral thing. It's an issue that you keep failing over and over. I keep trying to not yell at my wife. I have this anger issue. I'm on the road and everything was happy. I had devos. I prayed, but he cut me off. And he deserved that finger, right? Oh, it's just me. Okay. Right? We can struggle with failure. Maybe for you it's lust, it's lying, it's stealing. And you keep trying to cut it out, but you can't. And you live with maybe guilt. You carry a sense of inadequacy, always disappointed in yourself. And your spiritual struggle is real. And for some, the struggle is relational. It's a person. Don't look to your spouse right now. That's not the point. But maybe in reality, you're in a tough marriage, and there's some pain there. Or maybe it's the relationship that broke up. And there's some deep pain there. Maybe you've been estranged from a family member. Maybe someone, a family member, an uncle, someone close hurt you when you were young. All types of relational pain. Maybe you've faced rejection. People that were supposed to be there for you haven't been. And you battle deep loneliness. You battle anger because no one has been there for you. Feel worthless at times. Maybe you struggle with acceptance and your pain is real. Your struggle is real. Now, if you're like me, your pain is a combination. It's a cocktail of pain, right? You go physical pain, check. Emotional pain, check. Spiritual, yep. Relationship, yep. I got all of it, Nick. And if you're like me, you've begged God. Have you done this? Not joke, like really, God, please, God, take it away. Over and over the same things. And all you hear is crickets, silence. He hasn't answered. And what do we do if you're like me when we struggle with pain that's real? Some of us, you just try to not think about it, right? Let's just pretend it's not there. And my daughter, when she was just a little girl, if you have kids, I'm guaranteed one of your kids have done this. They love to write on the walls, right? My daughter did this. If it was a marker, if it was lipstick, crayon, whatever she could find, she had a season of her life that literally every day we'd find her, like she drew, look at that scribble design there. That's beautiful, Ellie, right? And you try to positively, and then I'd be with my bucket of paint covering it up. And so for me, and so many of us, that's like our lives. Just cover it with a smile. But there's layers of pain, mistakes, regret, hurt under it all. And if we're honest, I bet you've been confused at times and you've questioned God. How could this, pain? How could this be your will, God? How could you be truly in control? You know the pain that I'm going through. And at some point, we've probably everyone in the room, have turned to someone or something to just get a little bit of relief from pain. And some of you here won't even give God a chance because how could a good God let me go through this? Well, this morning, we're going to read a few verses from a guy who wrote this letter to some of his friends. And he had real pain. He had real struggle. His name was Paul. And in this portion of text we're going to read in his letter, he's telling his friends about a conversation he had with God about his pain. where he begged God to remove this pain in his life. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And many people believe he didn't really mean literal 3 times. He meant over and over, please God. He describes it as tormenting pain. And he lets us in on what God says. He doesn't remove the pain, but the words that God spoke to him. And it was so powerful that it transformed his life. And not just in the moment, because as we read these words, he's talking about something that happened 14 years ago. But as we read these words, we'll see that what he had learned 14 years ago about his pain, he carried with him and understood all of his pain through this lens. So much so, and he faced a lot of pain, that by the end of it, he says, now, and this is crazy, I delight in the struggle. I delight in the struggle. See, God told him there's a promise attached to pain. It's not a promise of no pain, okay? But it's a promise in the pain, that there's hope in the hurt. And I pray, man, if you're anything like me and you've lived with hurt, and you're here today and it's there, maybe it's surfacing right now. Wait, I didn't come to church. Nope. God wants to say something to you. He wants to tell you about a promise that he's given when you're in pain. Now, before we get into these few verses, let me give you 1 through 6, verses 1 through 6 of this letter, because we're going to jump in at verse 7. Paul is telling us about this incredible experience he had with God. He describes it as like being taken up to heaven. He doesn't know, was it in body? I don't know, but he saw things he could never describe, he says with words. And then, like that car that went off the ramp really suddenly for tacos, Paul changes directions. And he starts talking to us about pain and hurt. We pick it up in verse 7. Verse 7, chapter 12. He says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given, what? A thorn in the flesh. Meaning something that's been stuck in me and I've been living with. Look how he describes it. A messenger of Satan to torment me. Look, verse 8. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Now, we don't know what this was, but clearly, right, would you agree this was a struggle? This was pain. People that have studied Paul's letters, he wrote almost, I think it's about 13 letters in the New Testament. He is a prolific author, have studied his life. And here's some of the things that are possibilities that Paul's talking about as you read his stuff. His thorn, most people believe, was something physical, a thorn in the flesh, that he might have struggled with epilepsy. Maybe he had malaria, and it kept reoccurring. A lot of people believe he had an eye issue in the book of Galatians, that maybe he was possibly blind. Some people say he had a speech impediment, or he had terrible stage fright because it appears that he wasn't a great speaker. Some have said not physical, but emotional, that Paul, there's times you read his letters, you're like, maybe Paul struggles with depression. He'd given up. He says, at the point of death, I thought for sure it was over for me. He himself admits that he battled anxiety. We know that Paul had issues with regret from his past life. Before his conversion, he had gone around persecuting and killing Christians. Think about that. Think about that. Talk about regret. Some say it was spiritual. He said in the book of Romans, I don't understand myself. For the things I want to do that are right, I don't do. And the things that I hate, I do. And people for thousands of years, great men of God have believed Paul struggled with lust. Spiritual issue. We know that Paul could have very well have been relational, what he's talking about here, because Paul was constantly being chased out of cities he would go to by people that wanted him dead. His own countrymen, he was a Jew. He had been a leader of Jews. Now he's running from Jews, from people close to him who he'd given his life for. Paul's pain was real. God, take it away. But here's the promise. Look at verse 9. Oh, I'm so thankful for these verses. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. What's that? What does that grace look like? He says it. For my what? My power is made perfect in weakness. It continues in verse 9. Therefore, look what he says. I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Look at verse 10. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, and insults, hardships, persecution, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, here's the promise for you and I today. Here's what God had told Paul. Yeah, your struggle is real. That pain is no joke. But the power of God is real. And the power of God is no joke. And it's at the moment of weakness that God demonstrates the fullness of his power through our lives. See, the promise is that when you've lost all strength to deal with that physical problem, when your emotional suffering is overwhelming you, when your spiritual struggle is tormenting you, when the relational hardships are destroying you and eating away, you've done everything to fix it, you've even turned to God, and you feel like you're at the end of your rope, it's the beginning of seeing what God can do through your life. And I pray you hear that voice today of the Lord, that your struggle is just an opportunity for God's strength. That your pain is just opening the door for God to display his power. That your weakness is just an opportunity for God's greatness in your life. Now, ladies, you might not know this, but men, and I know this is a generalization, maybe some men aren't like this, but we like to flex, okay? I mean, from the moment we're little kids and daddy's like, go ahead and flex and show my friends how cute you are. We're like, right? You've seen little kids do that. Well, most dudes, that like never leaves. I mean, if I'm asked to bring up a grocery bag, I'm like, chest out, like flexing like I'm holding a 50-pound, dumbbell. I mean, just ask a guy to open a jar of salsa, right? My wife, babe, can you open this? Oh, I got this, babe. Roll up the sleeves, you're flexing. Essentially what's happening is God is saying, I like to flex. I like to show my power. Look how he says it in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9. 2 Chronicles 16:9. The eyes of the Lord search the whole earth in order to show himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are towards him. God says, I'm looking to show my power, reveal myself. See, when you're feeling weak, in the midst of your pain, God is saying, watch what I can do. Check it out, man. Look at my power. That's why Paul could say several times, he boasts, he delights in the pain. Now, Paul lived these words. These were etched on his heart. They echoed in his soul. And we don't see it so clearly in our English version. Most of us know that the New Testament was mostly written in Greek, Koine Greek. It's actually a dead language. It doesn't exist today. And our English translation misses it. And I want to point it out to you. If we go back to verse 9, he says, but he said to me, as if it was past tense, like 14 years ago. But in the Greek, it's actually the perfect tense, which speaks of an action that happened in the past, but has present effect and consequences. Meaning, Paul is saying to us, God keeps saying to me, these past 14 years, all the pain I've endured, all the suffering, every time I've turned him, God, it hurts, please take it away. He goes, he keeps telling me, no. When you're weak, I am strong. Now look at Paul. This dude suffered serious persecution and pain. Let me just read to you a short list. He spent about 6 years of his life in prison. He was beaten more times, he says, than he could count. Come on, right? What? Whipped with 39 lashes 5 times, beaten by rods 3 times, stoned, shipwrecked 3 times, fought off robbers. He'd been betrayed. He says he'd known many lonely and sleepless nights, starving, freezing, and he says, it's only half of it. This guy knew pain. And he says, despite all of it, he could look back and see, because God kept saying, oh, watch what I'm going to do, watch what I'm going to do. He can now see 14 years later, he's nearing the end of his ministry. Look what he did. Even when I was weak and saying, God, take this away so I could be effective for you. Oh, wait. And Paul planted churches. He traveled the then known world. Some suggest up to 10,000 miles. Suffering. He looks back and goes, but God, what God was doing. Yeah, my pain was real, but wow, so was the power of God in my life. And he didn't even know the half of it. He died not knowing that 13 of his letters would be in this book and give countless people for thousands of years encouragement and hope, right? Think about that. He died not even knowing the impact that God had used his life for. See, Paul learned what I believe God is going to be teaching me probably till the day I die, that he can do infinitely more with my weakness than I could ever do with my strength. It's God in me. It's the power of God, and it's in my moment of weakness. Now, at this point, I just want to call a time out. If you're not a Christian, you're like, these people are crazy. If you grew up in the church, you don't even see how crazy this is. You're like, oh yeah, the power of God in me, I get it, right? But this is a crazy thought, right? This is one of the greatest paradoxes of Christianity. You mean the God of heaven and earth actually demonstrates his power through you guys? And it's in weakness? No, that doesn't work. Because in our society, it's not the survival of the weakest. Nobody walks into Verizon and says, hey, can I get one of those 2004 Razors? You don't go buy a computer and ask for one with a floppy disk and a Pentium 4 processor. No, we want power. What's the fastest one you got? When you buy a car, how many horsepower? When you go for an interview, you bring your resume and you've padded that thing, man. You used all the right words to make it sound like you're awesome. And if you're like Dwight Schrute, you have two resumes. You've got a professional one, and you've got an athletic and special skills resume, right? And we hide our weaknesses. We take hundreds of selfies to get to the one we post. We put our best foot forward. You'll never read a ChristianMingle.com bio that says, I love long walks on the beach and hanging out with my dog and going to church and reading my Bible. And there is the occasional fit of rage in which I throw, scream, right? No. It's all the good things about us. Now, Corinth was the same. The people that Paul's writing to, this was a metropolis city, one of the biggest cities of that time. And they valued people that looked the part and acted the part. So much so that Paul alludes throughout this letter that there were people back in Corinth, a church that he had started, mostly friends, but some of them had started saying, look, there's better guys than Paul. Paul doesn't look the part. In fact, there's a 2nd century document that described this is what he looked like. He was short, bald, bow-legged, had a big nose, and a unibrow. Isn't that crazy? See, people would see Paul and go, that's Paul? There were better candidates than Paul. Not only did he not look the part, but he didn't act the part. He said that he's not a powerful speaker. Others had a better resume. Paul's resume was sickness, hurt, pain, suffering. Surely that's not the man of God. But see, God is not like us. In fact, God describes himself like this in the book of Isaiah. He says, as high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Now, the last time I checked, I believe the furthest known galaxy we've measured is 13.3 billion light years away. And every light year is about 5.9 trillion miles. Do the math. What? Right? And God says, yeah, that distance, that's my thoughts and your thoughts. So the Bible says, don't lean on your own understanding. Now, there's so many good memes about this, but I had to show you my favorite of what it feels like, following God and trusting his plan. Right? It feels like that. Because so often when we're in the storm, we can't see the sun. When you're in the heat of battle, you don't see the victory. When life throws us setbacks, we can't see the comeback. In our hurt, we can't see the hand of God. But what Paul is learning is, no, it's in the middle of it that God says, I'm going to reveal how great and powerful I am. Now, there's so many biblical examples I could turn to, but we don't have time for that. So what I thought I would do is just share one verse. Maybe read this chapter if you haven't, Hebrews chapter 11. It's called the Hall of Faith, and what it does is basically summarize all the heroes of the Bible, and it gives a brief story about them. And then there's this summary verse at the end of the chapter where it says this, their weakness was turned into strength. See, this is how God rolls. This is the pattern. And it's not clearer seen in any other place in the Bible than when we read the life of Jesus, right? I mean, think about Jesus. He was really acquainted with pain. You think of Jesus in the garden. We're told he was suffering intense anxiety. We think of Jesus in the garden begging the Father, what? 3 times. Remove this cup from me. We think of Jesus dealing with rejection when all of his disciples, those closest to him, ran away in his moment of need. Jesus knows about thorns. Jesus knows about getting beat up. Jesus knows about death. And there were so many people in Jesus' day that said, wait, our Savior, Messiah, has come to die? That's weak. We want a Savior that's strong. We can all agree there's no greater weakness than death, right? There's not much you can do when you're dead. But see, this is what God was doing, right? God was working and saying it's in that great moment of defeat when it appears all hope is gone, death, that God was working to raise Jesus from the dead. Because God's plan was Jesus would take on our sin and suffer the punishment of sin. But Jesus wasn't just a man. He was God-man, and God could raise him to prove that he could take all of our sin. If he had just laid in a grave dead, it was nothing. It was just another man that died. But no, it was in weakness that he found. The power of God was displayed. And at times, you might feel like Jesus did that Friday as he was in the garden. And you're begging God to remove the pain. But the power of God is at work in your life. And Sunday is coming. There might be times in your life, I'm acquainted with these times, where you might feel like Jesus did on that Friday, abandoned and alone. Oh, but the power of God is at work. And Sunday is just right around the corner. And you'll see it. There might be times in your life, the struggle, the pain might make you feel like Jesus did on that Friday as he suffered unimaginable physical, literal pain. But pain can't hold back the power of God. And Sunday is coming. Maybe life for you on occasion or often has made you feel dead, helpless, hopeless, like Jesus was laying in a grave. But the power of God was at work. It wasn't over. God was working. And Sunday, for you, for him, was coming. And I think ultimately that's what Paul's doing. He's defending to some people that said he's not worthy. He's saying, look, my list of accomplishments are like Jesus's. And in death and in weakness, that's how he works. If it was how Jesus works, shouldn't everyone that follows Jesus, shouldn't it be the same way? And if you're like me, you go, why, God? And at this point, we should all know, right? But look at what Paul says back in verse 7. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited. I don't know if you noticed that the first time we read it. Paul said, I had all these great revelations of God, and God, you're so good, and wow. And then God said, yeah, but I know you're going to struggle with pride, so I'm going to bring some weakness because I don't share glory. And if you're up there parading yourself and everyone's like, wow, look at how talented Paul is, and he's got it all together. Wow, Paul is great. But no, Paul said it was that God would teach him and make sure Paul knew, because he's going to do great things through Paul's life, that Paul never for a second thought it was about him. See, it's not about us, right? It's not about me. It's about him. Paul would go into towns and he would tell people about Jesus. And this was the guy that used to persecute Christians. He used to kill Christians, and people would be like, is this a joke? Wait, wasn't he just killing us and now he's telling us to become one? There's something going on here. And Paul said this in Galatians. He said, people were glorifying God in me. And that's what God's saying to you today. People should go, yeah, but isn't that, didn't God used that guy? Nah. Yep. That's how God does it, in the pain, in the suffering. See, God made man small and the universe huge to teach us something. He's great, we're not. It's Christ in you, the hope of glory, not Christ and you, the hope of glory, right? It's God in me. That's the hope for the world. This is the whole message of Christianity, is get to God. He's awesome. I'm not as awesome. And if you're not a Christian here today, you're like, this message is blowing my mind, because I thought for sure all Christians thought they had it together, and they're like, follow me, I'm awesome. Nope. Sometimes the tide of life pulls us away from that shore, but yeah, what Christianity is really about, the world doesn't need, friends don't need, neighbors don't need, the city doesn't need people that got it together. They need an encounter with God. They need the power of God displayed through us, through people that are working on it. He's the one that saves. He's the one that changes. He is the one that ultimately will glorify, bring us to glory. It's all about him. See, if you hope to be successful, hold tightly to your strengths. But if your goal is to be respected, oh yeah, you better hold on to your talents. If your aim is to be admired by people, oh, talk up your talents, your accomplishments, your competencies. But if your goal is to bring glory to the King of Kings, cling to your weakness. That's what God is saying to Paul. That's what God is saying to us this morning. See, this is how God got a hold of me. He keeps telling me this. I gave my life to the Lord, like for real, when I was just a young adult. And I'm now 26. No, 38. Just kidding. And I feel like Paul, I can say, like, he keeps teaching me the same lesson. Because where it started for me is I'd walked away from the Lord growing up in the church. I got my own apartment. I had independence, and I was partying and doing some stupid stuff. And my dad, who's a pastor, it's like the worst thing ever to have a dad as a pastor. Because he can, like, smell sin, you know? Like, he knows. And I knew, he knew. And he was so gracious with me. I remember one day he came over and he knew, and he could smell the apartment, and it smelled, you know, wasn't potpourri. And he was like, hey, son, why don't you come with me to this Christian conference? You know, it was back in Philadelphia. And I went just to appease Dad, you know, because he was being so nice to me, and he didn't, like, just chew me out. And I went, and I remember I got there, and maybe this is how some of you feel today. You're like, lame. Really, I just did it to, like, make him happy. I remember standing up, and they'd be singing, and I'd just be kind of sitting there, and, you know, it's before iPhones. I don't even know what I did when I was bored, but midway through the conference, the guy that was leading music, he was so not cool. Like, he didn't have skinny jeans, right? He didn't wear cool clothes. It was just him and a guitar. There was all these people, and I remember thinking, like, this guy? Right? Like, I could do better than you, dude. I really thought that's how prideful, how lost I was. And it was towards, like I said, towards the end of the conference, I was just standing there, maybe making fun of this guy, and he starts singing this song called Arms of Love. The words are, I sing a simple song of love to my Savior, my loving Jesus. My heart is glad that you've called me your own, my loving Savior. So thankful that you hold me in your arms of love, your arms of love, your arms of love. And God flexed on me. Like, I lost it. Like, I was so hard. I had such a big wall. It was like a force field of no. And God was just, bah. I love you, Nick, still. I love you still. I love you still. I love you still. And I was like, you're using this guy? You know, and he doesn't even know to this day how God used his weakness to transform my life, because it was, I never went up to him and said, wow, you're amazing at singing. Wow, you got the best voice. I aspire to be like you. And I was like, he just let God do it through him. I pray that encourages you, church. I pray you leave here strengthened, blessed, and feeling a little bit like this last meme I have for you this morning. It's so funny, man. I love memes. And I pray in all honesty that you leave here today with this truth, that, yeah, your pain's real. And the promise isn't you won't have pain, but it's in your pain. It's in your pain. It's in the struggle that God says, check out my power. And like Paul, you'll look back and you'll go, wow. Man, I remember I was depressed when that happened, but look what God did. I remember I was begging and pleading God, heal me, heal me, heal me. But look what he did. It was better than a healing. Look at what God did. And little by little, this has been my prayer, because I'm definitely not like Paul, where I can boast and delight quite yet in weakness. It still hurts sometimes. Sometimes I still get sad. I still ask God, remove it. And I'm not saying you should stop doing any of that, but it's profound that one of the greatest men of faith says, I delight in it now. We close with this portion of a play. It was written in 1928 by a man named Thornton Wilder. Now, before you think I'm cool and cultured, I didn't read this play. It was actually Ron that told me about this play. He's way cooler than me. And I thought it was so perfect and fitting. It's a short play, and there's two main characters, a newcomer and an angel. And what it is kind of, not a parody, but it's taken from a biblical story in John chapter 5 about the pool of Bethesda. Maybe you've heard about that, where there was this pool, and all of these lame people would gather around this pool, and the angel would come and stir the waters, and the people that were able to get in the pool while the water was stirring, they'd all be healed. So the play is kind of based off of that story. The newcomer is the one wanting to get the healing. He's a physician, we're told, and then the angel. First, listen to how this newcomer describes his struggle. He says, here on the lowest step, I wait with festering limbs, with my heart in pain. Free me, long expected love, from this old burden. And then the angel appears, begins to stir the waters. And the angel says to him, draw back away, for this moment isn't for you. Healing is not for you. The newcomer says, surely, O prince, you haven't been deceived by my apparent wholeness. Your eyes can see the nets in which my wings are caught. The sin into which my endeavors sink, half performed, cannot be concealed from you. The angel says, I know. The newcomer responds, it is no shame then to boast to you, angel, of what I could do in the Lord's service, where I just freed from this bondage. And here it is. The angel says, without your wound, where would your power be? It is your very remorse that makes your low voice tremble into the hearts of men. The very angels themselves cannot persuade the wretched and blundering children on earth, as can one human being broken on the wheels of living. In the Lord's service, only the wounded soldiers can serve.